Well, welcome, Touched by Grace, with my friends Dave and Jamie Platt, and we're here to talk about how the Lord has touched your lives with His grace and the love that's found in Jesus. And like most of us, it was years before you came across God's love and what He was going to do in your life, and so that's what we want to hear about. So we're going to start with a little background, and Dave, you're not from our neck of the woods, so tell us where you're from.
I'm from upstate, real upstate New York, not 2 miles above New York City, but halfway between Syracuse and Canada. So, hour from Canadian border, and small rural town, backwoods, party phone lines, rural route mailing address, real country, which most people don't think of that with New York. Yeah. And I lived there for 29 years, moved out to Idaho when I was 29, but grew up sort of poor, backwoods, and a lot of alcoholism around. We called our road Divorce Road because everyone got divorced on it. And but we all everyone was poor, so no one really knew they were poor type thing. You're sort of all in the same boat and never really felt bad for yourself or anything like that. And just lower middle class working family. My dad was a logger. Mom was a homemaker. She was a nurse when she was younger. And four of us total in the family. My oldest brother passed away as a baby, and SIDS, and 2 older sisters and myself. And Dad was a real hard worker, but not really much of a husband and a father. Sort of went to the good old boy school where you work hard, which he was. He was an incredibly hard worker. And then you sort of go to the bar after, and you stay there till 2 in the morning. And if you got a girlfriend, then that's what you did. And so that's sort of what we grew up with. Mom was awesome, homemaker, really. I looked around growing up and always felt lucky, looking back, it was dysfunction junction, but, every house around us was so much worse. My best friend, he didn't even know his parents ever taught him to bathe. We'd go up to his house and he'd make lunch, and it was a 6-pack of Coke and sugar sandwiches, and, just taking care of himself as a little guy, He just had no one really there to look out for him. Where I knew I had someone that loved me, and I knew I had someone looking out for me. So, big picture felt okay there, but it was definitely not a real healthy environment. My parents were married 23 years, and they got divorced when I was 11 or 12, and I remember being, young. I only remember probably the last 5-6 years of their marriage, and it was really bad. I can remember the cops showing up to serve Dad papers and divorce papers and all the fighting, and, Dad pulling in with a log truck at 2:30 in the morning, and then the fight would ensue, and my wall shared the wall that they would argue, and, hearing how broken down my mom was, and, just the pain of 20-something years of that kind of a marriage, it took a toll on her, and the relationships with family. My sister, my middle sister had turned my mom in for abuse, even though she wasn't abusive, just because she wanted to get out of there, because she wouldn't let her live with her boyfriend. She was living in a foster home. My old sister didn't want anything to do with my mom, couldn't stand her. She was more of a daddy's girl, and to this day, they still don't talk.
Your mom and your sister?
My mom and my oldest sister.
Yeah.
My oldest sister just thinks my mom's the devil pretty much, and which I have the total opposite opinion. I was a mama's boy from day one. My dad and I we had it's like my older sister's relationship with my mom. I was just the opposite. I was really close to my mom, and my father and I just were not at all. Just did not like each other, didn't get along, never had anything in common. I was into sports. He was more of a logger, woman, party drink guy, and he's a real nice guy, real personable, but we just didn't have anything in common. And the few things that we did like in common, I intentionally avoided just because I didn't want anything to do with him, really, to be honest. So parents split up at 11.
What happened at that point, Dave? They're still stayed in the same community, but now they're divorced. And
a small town, everyone knows everyone. And,
right.
We had nowhere. Really, the way it sort of went down, and actually it plays into why I moved out here, was my mom's brother lives here in Idaho Falls, and they used to come back and stay with us at my mom and dad's house every 3 years. And they happened to show up the summer that my mom basically just sort of snapped. I don't know if she nervous breakdown or what do you want to call it, but it was it. she just left. I woke up one morning and she was gone, and Mom wasn't there anymore. She just bailed.
12 or 11?
Yeah, 11-ish, something like that. And of course, it was as my aunt and uncle were there staying with my dad, who's not their family, So it was like pretty uncomfortable. So next thing you know, we're all scrambling all over the place trying to find where we're going to go. I woke up to my older sister and her boyfriend tell me Mom was hooking up with men and Dad found her and this and that. It was just chaos. You didn't know what to believe and who was doing what, and everyone had things to say about everybody. And I was just an innocent kid. I didn't know what was going on. I was just sort of crazy, And I ended up going down. I was really hostile with my mom for a while there because, it was weird because I grew up with the knowledge that my dad was always fooling around. I knew my dad was sleeping with girls that were in high school with my sister while he was married to my mom. I knew that as a 10, 11-year-old kid, so it didn't freak me out if my dad was fooling around. But if my mom, I held her up on a pedestal, maybe she wasn't worthy of quite being on that pedestal, but she, still in my eyes, she was, I held her in very high esteem. And, the fact that she would potentially do that or, even hang out with another guy really bothered me. I just because I held her in such high regard. And, seeing what Dad doing that did, it really bothered me. And so I can still remember that day going down and meeting her and talking to her. And, it fractured our relationship quite a bit just for the short term there. And we were all scrambling for a place to stay. So there was I think 9 of us piled into my aunt's trailer. We're sleeping on recliners and lazy boys and on the floor. And because it was my aunt and uncle and their 2 kids, and then me and my mom and my grandma lived was next door in the trailer to my aunt and uncle. So there was people everywhere and they decided to get me out of there and fly me out here for a month because it was just bad. It was not good there.
Was it during school? It was summer.
It was summer.
So you could come for a month.
And I actually almost stayed out here. I was really close to staying and potentially going in. Of course, I was two blocks away from my future wife. Who knew? No idea. And I was just real shy. I was a real shy kid, and they said I was there for the whole month before I started to actually even play with the other kids. It was literally my last 2 days here in Idaho Falls before I actually started even hanging out with the other kids in the neighborhood and playing with them. And it sort of freaked me out because I'd never really seen a functional family unit. It weirded me out to see my aunt and uncle and their kids because it was I'd never seen healthy family relationships like that. Not that they didn't have their own dysfunction. Every household has its own problems, but I just never experienced it, and it weirded me out, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe that sounds bizarre to people, but it was so uncomfortable for me at first to see a mom and a dad and a daughter and a son that were okay. And it wasn't constant chaos. And not that everything was bad all the time in my house. I don't want to make it like that, but even just the households that surrounded where I grew up, it was just crazy.
That was the norm for the neighborhood.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah, real dysfunction. So they obviously divorced. I came back, and my mom was pretty messed up at that point. She was just really emotionally just ravaged. All those years that had just caught up with her, and she was just broken. We didn't have anywhere to go. We didn't have any money.
So were you going to have to get out of that house?
We did. And that was sort of the one thing. It was sort of I actually supported my mom divorcing my dad because I just knew it wasn't good, and I saw what it was doing to her. And we weren't of faith. We grew up Catholic. But and I remember going to Catholic church as a little boy and getting looks because I took my little pail of crayons, and people were offended because I took crayons into church as a 4-year-old and colored about my mom. And as long as I was quiet, it was okay. And I did my first communion. I didn't ever do my confirmation or anything like that. But we weren't as a family really. She did it because her parents had done it, and it was just part of the community, and almost everyone was Catholic, and so you sort of did it. My dad was an altar boy when he was really young, but I never saw him in a church, So there was no relationship with Jesus or anything like that. It was more doing it because that's what our people did, right. Christmas Mass, Easter, and, occasional Sunday service.
So what did that time look like from there on? You're 11, now you got it's a whole new world.
Yeah,
a single parent.
I had to grow up fast at that point. I had to become the man, and my mom was broken. I had to take care of her, so it was just and the people I came from were real hard workers. So for me, it was just sort of a natural thing. It's it's just time to man up, And about all she could really do at that point was go to work and come home, And here she was like Susie Homemaker,
Before.
Yeah, and now she could hardly function. It was just hard enough just for her to get through the day. And she had no job skills because she was a stay-at-home mom. So she was started trying to become like a medical receptionist gal. So, making minimum wage. I think she was making about $7,000 or $8,000 a year. And that's what we were living on. My aunt and grandma, the aunt I'm staying with that summer when things got crazy, my grandmother was sick at that time, and she was starting to have a lot of congestive heart failure and mini strokes and things. So she actually moved into my grandma's trailer, and they shared the sort of the same lot. And so my mom and I, because we didn't have anywhere to go, we ended up moving into my grandma's trailer and living there. So it's because we couldn't afford rent, we couldn't afford anything. The house we lived in as part of the divorce, that was like the one thing I was really wanted to try and keep, because that was, I didn't mind that the family was broken up, but I wanted to stay in my house. I wanted to stay in my home. It was really important to me as a little boy. Yeah. And so my mom, through that, fought for possession of the house, and she paid my daddy some money to sort of square up the balance there and stuff like that. But we could never afford to live in it. We couldn't even afford to heat it. I'm like, I'll chop the wood, Mom. I'll do whatever we need to do. I'll work a job. I didn't care. I'm like, I just want to live there, but we couldn't. And it just was never realistic. Mm-hmm. So she held on to it for years and rented it, but that was a losing proposition because the people of the area, it's a poor area, a lot of welfare, and people just destroy things and don't take care of things. Yeah. And it was just not a good thing. So we lived in the trailer and took care of Mom. She would... we didn't really have much hot water.
Took care of Grandma and Mom.
Well, Grandma was with my Aunt Bessie next door. Okay. So, but I spent a lot of time there because my mom, I'd get home from school and there wasn't a lot of food. Mm-hmm. So I'd always go over to Aunt Bessie's, and she was a homemaker, an awesome lady, and she'd had her husband and all of her kids died in a car accident, and then she got remarried, had a child. That child died at birth. So I was her godson. In Catholic Church, you have godchildren. Mm-hmm. So she was my godmother, and she really didn't have kids. So basically, my middle sister and I were like her kids, mm-hmm. So we had a really close bond with her, and she was just an awesome lady. And so I spent a lot of days over there playing cards and eating dinner, and she took care of me for a lot of years there. It was a huge blessing to be next to her.
So you get into high school, and how long until you start following in Dad's footsteps?
Well, Dad started feeding me beer at 2. Yeah, I started drinking from the time I was a little guy. The first time I was drunk several times before I was even 10. Mm-hmm. First time I drank to the point of throwing up, I was 9. Mm-hmm. Passing out, So I was drinking from a really early age, not on a habitual basis. Started smoking cigarettes and chewing at 10. Mm-hmm. But I was sort of like a brainchild too, though. I was a super straight A student, always scoring crazy high on all the placement tests, and was sort of a little child prodigy at that age, real straight laced. But I still had this drinking influence in my life. But it wasn't like a habitual thing when you're 9, 10. It was just, it happened 1 month and then maybe 2 months later type mm-hmm. thing. I think I went through 2 or 3 years taking care of my mom, and I started to get a little bit probably resentful. I was working a lot. I worked a lot as like a 14, 15-year-old kid, and it just got to the point where I got really rebellious and just wanted to do whatever I wanted to do. I was tired of people telling me what to do, and she really had no control over me, because if she said anything, I was at my dad's, and he lived in a bachelor pad, and they were partying all the time, and bad-mouthing her and calling her this and that, and mm-hmm. she was trying to protect me from being in that environment, but as soon as she tried to discipline me, I was like, see ya, so I just started bouncing. One time she kicked me out, but in general, I just sort of bounced around. I lived, I was different places every night. Mm-hmm. I started heavily drinking at 14, got into drug use. I lived with my first girlfriend when I was 14. Obviously sexual immorality all over the wazoo and all sorts of bad things. But at that point, I was really pretty sold out to drugs and alcohol, and still managed to get, I would fail all year in school, and in New York, you have Regents exams, and I would take the final at the end of the year and never study. I'd go drink before the finals and get 97s on the state Regents, and so all my transcripts looked like I had straight A's and A pluses and advanced placement and everything, but I was never in school. You're only supposed to miss a certain amount of days. I would miss like 40 days a year and be late 40 times, and mm-hmm. and they were so supposed to like fail me, but I'm like, I'm in advanced placement, I have A's and everything. How can you fail me? So eventually they got me into drug and alcohol counseling in school and stuff like that, and but I'd go crack some beers before my drug and alcohol counseling, and she'd know I was drinking, and I was like, whatever. I just, no one was going to touch me at that point. Yeah, I was a total punk, mm-hmm. and then. But still had some brains, so somehow I stumbled into going to college. My parents, they never had any clue about that. They didn't help me. I did all my financial aid applications and sought out the schools myself, and got enrolled to a school in Rochester Institute of Technology for computational mathematics, and but I was just a total bozo. I was just a partier. drugs, drinking, women, and didn't know how to study, didn't know how to go to class, didn't know how to do anything, and just about failed out in my first year. Tried to turn around and straighten up, and I did, and I eventually got good grades and worked my way through school and got good jobs, but still always...
2-year program or a 4-year program?
It was actually 5 years the way they did it, because you start doing, you do internships or co-ops after your first 2 years.
Okay.
So you start working in your field, so by the time you graduate, you got field experience. So once again, I was a good worker, I was a sharp kid, so I got hired. My first internship I went to do, they hired me full time. So I was a salaried, and I went to college at 17. So I was a salaried employee at 19 years old, working as a computer programmer. In one way I was really gifted and had a lot of talents and was a really hard worker, but I was just totally self-destructive. Everything I did 150%. So drugs and alcohol were just consuming my life little by little. And through the years, went through a lot of ups and downs with that, but got through college, graduated, got to the point where I was sort of a country boy, and I didn't really appreciate the fakeness of some of the suburbia people that I was working with, and just wanted to go back to my roots. And
from Rochester.
From Rochester back home to the country, to North.
There's not a lot of need for a computer programmer or back in the sticks?
I was a contract. I worked out of my home.
Oh, yeah, so it didn't matter.
So here I was, a 20-something-year-old kid, making 6 figures, working out of my home, getting high all day, getting drunk all night, doing whatever I wanted to do. And I worked a lot of hours, I worked hard, but I was always under the influence. I was always, I could still function that way, however, but the area I would move back to, like I said, it's a really depressed area, and as I got older and started hanging out in the bars, I was hanging out with biker dudes and Vietnam vets that were crazy, that had broke in Vietnam and were really messed up, and the gals I was dating, they had 4 kids from 4 different fathers, and they'd lost their custody of their children, and because of this and that, and they're committing suicide or trying to commit suicide, and it was just everyone's fighting everyone all the time, and nobody had any hope. And here I was a kid, I had a lot going for me. I was sort of a big fish in a small pond, and I never saw myself being sucked into that mentality where I didn't care about my life anymore. But I had a lot of, emotional baggage from my past and the chaos of the way I grew up, and pretty angry. And the harder I got into, the harder drugs. And, a typical day for me the last 2-3 years before I moved out here was, wake up and get high because I was so hungover that my stomach was just out of control and I couldn't even stand how bad I felt. And then, maybe pop a few pain pills, go down to the bar, and I would have them make Bloody Marys for me, and I called them hot and heavy. And what that meant was 90% bar vodka and then a little bit of tomato juice. And somehow that calmed my stomach on top of being high. I don't know how that worked, but it did. Yeah. I would drink about 3 of those, big glasses of almost straight vodka. And then I would be able to eat my 1 meal a day, because then my stomach would be settled down a little bit. And then I would commence to drink about a case of beer, half a bottle of tequila, get high 6-7 times, pop some pain pills, and that was every day. Maybe there was some acid or some other harder drugs here and there, but that was sort of what I got to almost every day, every day. And then like I said, the people that lived there, they had no hope. And I didn't realize over time, and I went through a stretch where I buried about 6 people in 6 months. A lot more tragic. All people dying in accidents and cancer that just rotted them out, and just I was already sort of emotionally messed up. I was always under the influence. Then you go through that and you don't know how to cope with death, and it just really put me into a downward spiral where all of a sudden, I was never a mean guy, but I became pretty hostile, and I used to be a big weightlifter guy, so I was a bouncer in these bars, and it was nothing for me to want to mix it up or just intimidate people, or I would start to try and I was one of those guys that started to try and pick fights, which that's just not me. I'm not. I was never that kind of person.
You're angry and bitter. You're just like looking for a way to get that aggression.
And I never understood it. I think as a guy in a guy's world, you sort of think, oh, I'm going to beat him up and I'm going to win the fight. And what I realized when I got to that point was that now I understood why all these people that lived there that had no hope would fight. It wasn't that they were trying to beat you up or win or anything. They wanted to inflict some of their pain on you. And it didn't matter what you did to them. It didn't matter if you hurt them, because they were already hurting. They just wanted to make you feel what they felt. And that's how I was getting to. I was getting nasty, and just turning on people that were tight with me. And I was freaking out these hardcore people. And they were like, you need to slow down, dude. The biker guys and the bartenders and... and of course you're drinking and driving every day, and always under the influence, and I got pulled over totally drunk. Somehow got out of DWI. I've been drinking for 12 hours. I had weed in me on my pockets. The guy never patted me down, and just somehow, and now I know, looking back, the Lord was just steering me, man. It was amazing that but I knew it was sort of weird. I just something came over me, where I knew if I was going to stay there and continue to do that it wasn't sustainable. And in the midst, somehow, because nobody in the midst of that, when you're that far deep, gets an epiphany. But somehow, once again, it had to be the Lord just planting that seed in me that I knew if I was going to stay there, I was going to be dead, in prison, or in a wheelchair. Yeah. There was no option. I was going too hard, and I was too out of control. Mm-hmm. And let's
leave you right there. Let's leave you in the pit of despair.
Before I come out.
Yeah, before you come out, and we're gonna talk about that. And so, far away from the woods of New York is my friend Jamie. She's growing up in small town Idaho Falls. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And so tell me what Jamie's life is like.
I don't know. I grew up LDS. However, we were considered Jack Mormons because we didn't actually go to church. The only time I would go is if my friend invited me. Mm-hmm. And then when I was 7, because my dad's LDS and my mom grew up Catholic. And so they met in Chicago when he was going to school there. And she had told him, if we can get married in the Roman Catholic Church that my grandmother wants me to get married in, I will convert to LDS.
After the wedding, just get married in the Catholic Church then, okay.
Yeah, and so he agreed to it. And of course, his parents were very upset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my dad was sort of a heathen too. Mm-hmm. He loved to party, and he smoked, and he didn't go to church or anything like that. And so they did, and then their honeymoon was moving out here and stuff. And then they had my sister, Kim, and she's about 9 years older than me. And then my dad worked as a farmer. And then they had my brother, and he's 22 months older than me, Robbie. Mm-hmm. And then they had me. And when I was 7, my dad got in an accident.
On the farm?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He was in a hurry. He wanted to get home because he was tired of working late all the time. And he was hauling hay bales, stacking them up. And they were about 1,200 pounds a piece. And he was doing 2 at a time when he knew he should have been doing 1. And he hit a hole, and the hay bale fell back onto his back. And he couldn't get out fast enough because he knew what was happening. And so he just leaned forward. And it crushed his back. And so the guys came running over to help him. And they pulled him out. And all he could do was just scream that he couldn't feel his legs. It's like, I can't feel my legs. I can't feel my legs. And he crushed a lung and lost a couple of ribs. They had to remove them and stuff. And so we ended up living in Salt Lake for, I think it was 6 months.
Yeah,
he was in the hospital.
They had to helicopter him down.
Yeah, they had to helicopter him down there.
And you were 7 at that time. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
And so they enrolled us at the school down there. We lived with my cousins, and there was 7 of them at the time in this house.
It was a full house.
It was torture.
Getting some bathroom time is kind of tough. You get that many people in one house.
We did good probably for about the first week, and then after that, it was just downhill.
Yeah.
But we had to go to church with them, and we had to do everything that they did, and
because they were committed.
Because they're very LDS. Mm-hmm. And but then again, they also they gave us a home to stay in, so we could be close to our dad, and stuff like that. And it got to the point where we were probably ripping each other's hair out before we finally went back, because Robbie and my sister and I were different. We were very different, and we didn't believe in the same things they did. Mm-hmm. So then when we moved back home, I come home to a home that's completely revamped. They put in a garage, they put in ramps, they had to expand the doorways, everything for my dad. And then when he came home, he was bedbound for a while, and he had an in-home nurse that would come and take care of him and help him with the personal things he needed and stuff. And so I was always right there, sort of watching and helping and doing what I can. Mm-hmm. I'm sort of the type of person that I want to take care of people. Mm-hmm. And so I just feel if I take care of my dad, he'll be okay. Mm-hmm. And then when I was in 3rd grade, I don't know if I came home from school or what happened, but my mom had said she had to rush him to the hospital because he was vomiting blood. And so I panicked, of course, and they said he lost a lot of blood. He had a bleeding ulcer. He had to stay in the hospital for a few days. Well, then what happened in 4th grade, because then a year later, I thought to myself, if I stay home, my dad will be okay. And so I started being sick, like just physically making myself sick. And I was missing a lot of school. And at the time, I didn't know, really. I mean, 4th grade, I wasn't really saying, oh, if I stay home. But now that I look back, I think that was my focus, was if I'm home with my dad, nothing will happen to him. He'll be fine. And so I went through tons of lab tests, and they did like x-rays and scans and everything to find out what was going on with me. My dad took me to his doctor that took care of his ulcer. And the doctor sort of scared me. He says, I could just go in and pump your stomach out like we had to do your dad's. I'm like, I don't think so.
I'm not so sick anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I started going back to school.
Going back to school.
And they got me a counselor because they figured out it was psychological and stuff. And they said whenever my stomach hurts, I could eat crackers or anything like that. And so that's how my whole 4th grade year went. And at that time, my brother started rebelling because he was in 6th grade. And he would just run off with his friends, as we're going to school and stuff. They'd ditch school. And I really thought that he was running away. And I had told his teacher when we got to school, I said, my brother's not coming to school today. And she says, well, how come? I said, because he ran away. So they got my mom involved. They got the cops involved and everything. But I really thought he was done. And I've always sort of protected him as well. And so that's sort of how my elementary years went. And nothing had happened to my dad since then. But junior high, my mom was so focused on taking care of my brother because he rebelled so much and he got involved in the drugs, and that I was sort of pushed aside. And I felt very neglected. And so about 8th grade is when I started to cut. And it was the only way that would take my pain away, it felt like. And I would sit in my bedroom floor. I can picture it now. I would just be rocking back and forth, just hurting and wanting something. I was longing for something. And instead of calling on God, because I knew he was there, I was calling on Satan. And so he came into my life for a few years at that time. And I did a lot of damage to myself, to my friends, just evil. It was scary. My aunt had saw me. I was 15, and we went down to go to Florida with her. And she said she had never seen me like that before. She said my eyes were black. I was very mean, very scary, and stuff. So then I started going to counseling again and trying to figure out what was going on. And so when I was 17, I got pregnant with Taylor. And it's kind of funny because at that time, and I think a lot of this, because like when I was 14, 15 years old, I started reading the Bible. But where I started was Revelation.
Man, wow.
Because
you just jumped in with both feet.
I did. Well, what happened is because for some reason, the talk of the end of the world and stuff like that, so I asked my mom, and she said, well, it's in the book of Revelation in the Bible. And I was freaked out. I thought the world was coming to an end. And so I would pray to God. And I didn't even have a relationship with him, but I'm like, Lord, I don't want the world to end. I want to have kids before the world ends. And so then I got pregnant with Taylor. And I'm like, at first I wanted an abortion. My mom's like, absolutely not. And then I wanted to give her up for adoption. And she says, no, you created this. You're going to raise her and take care of her. And so, of course, I was very upset with her because I was like, there's no way I'm having a kid. So then I thought, okay, this is just a test. I'm going to end up miscarrying. And I couldn't tell my dad for probably the first 2 months. And at first I was extremely sick, and they were taking me in for tests again. And so my dad...
Morning sickness.
And so I was sitting on the couch, and my dad was watching TV, and he's like, he looks at me. He says, did you ever find out what was wrong with you? I'm like, yeah. Well, what'd they say? Well, they say I'm pregnant. He sat there for a minute. He's like, well, that doesn't sound like too much fun. And he didn't talk to me for about 3 months. And I knew I had broke his heart and devastated him. And that really hurt. And so when I had her, I thought, because I didn't miscarry, I thought, well, God's going to take her away from me, so she's going to die of SIDS. Or, this is going to happen. And sure enough, here she is 16 years old today, and just the light of my life. I mean, she's amazing. And But he never did. So then I thought, the world's really coming to an end soon. Because
you had
he
a
gave me a
child.
kid. So then I prayed, Lord, don't let the world end yet. I said, I want her to grow up and I want her to have a family, because at the time, I wasn't saved, and I was more worried about the world ending and where we were going to go and stuff. And so, so that was an interesting journey there. But I had tried the drug thing. I had tried the drinking thing. And I never did like the way it made me feel.
You weren't very good at it.
Some people have skills they should
I tried to corrupt her, and it's just like, you're crying after one beer. This is pathetic. All right, you stop. I'll just go do it myself.
But what you did, you said earlier, and did it continue? What about the cutting? Or
It lasted for about a year.
Yeah. And tell me about that. It's such a big thing today, and has gained such traction. What you said that it makes the pain go away, but you would think it would cause pain. And
it did, yeah.
Explain. I mean, what can you describe? Kind of what is it? Letting people know you're cutting to get attention?
It's a call for help.
It's a call for help.
For me, it was a call for help because I felt very neglected.
Yeah.
My mom was so consumed in my brother and all the struggles he was going through. He wasn't the brightest kid in school. He has dyslexia. He was actually born a preemie, 3 months early. And so she's always sort of been more concerned with him, his health, and everything that was going on with him. And when he really rebelled, I was sort of left in the dark. And so, I mean, I would just go home after school and sit in my room on the floor for hours, just rocking back and forth. And no one would come in to see what was going on, ever.
Yeah.
And
so it's a loneliness and feeling neglected. And
yeah.
So would you cut invisible places so mom could see it, so dad could see it?
I actually cut it on my hand.
On hand. So, I mean,
took an
everybody would know.
X-Acto knife and I would just do little slices on my hand.
Yeah.
And I would never.
How would they respond to that? Nothing.
They didn't do anything.
Mom didn't say, "Oh, honey, what's going on?" Nothing.
Nope. I don't think she noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was a cry for help, and also I think it was Satan getting a hold on me.
Yeah.
And he's like, "This is how you need to take care of this."
And how'd that come to an end? See, because you said like a year and a half, and then you just like this is not productive. What was it? What through your mind at that time?
It was weird because, to be honest, I'm not really sure. I just, I guess I didn't like the pain of slicing myself, and I thought to myself, this is really dumb. It's not getting me anywhere. It's not getting me the attention I wanted.
Right.
And so, of course, the next thought is suicide, and trying to figure out a way to do that because I felt like nobody cared.
Right.
Nobody
so just check out. Life's too hard. Just check out.
I'm like, I just don't really want to do this anymore. And my dad was working at that point. He got a job at the site, and so I never saw him, unless it was the evening. And by then he was tired and ready for bed. And so I would try to go to my mom to talk to her about my issues, and she wouldn't. I don't know if she just didn't realize she wasn't giving me the time of day. But I would sit at the table and I said, "Mom, can I talk to you?" And then my brother or his friend would come up and they'd start talking to her, and I was no longer there. And we would sit at the dinner table, and my parents would be like, "How's your day?" And I'd start to tell them, "Oh, my day was great." And I'd start to tell them, and they would start carrying their own conversation like I wasn't even there anymore. And so that was very hurtful. But so I think I just, I grasped on to Satan, and he gave me very evil thoughts of committing murder, committing suicide, causing pain on other people. And it took until I was about 23 to really let go. And what had happened is I used to have these dreams that somebody was coming after me, and I would try to wake up and I couldn't wake up. And I would open my eyes and they were forced shut. And that's when it really started to scare me, and I realized he is coming after me and he's trying to get a hold of my soul. And so I started going to counseling when I was 22. And I started telling this counselor, and I don't know if he was Christian or not. I told him what was going on in these dreams I was having. And there was one time when I was actually able to wake up. I had just barely fallen asleep. It happens within the first, 15, 20 seconds of finally getting down. And I could see myself sitting on the edge of the bed. And in the doorway was Taylor, and she came running in and gave me a hug. And then my nephew came in and gave me a hug. Well, then there was this black shadow in a kid form coming to give me a hug, and I knew that that was not right. And I was able to wake up before he got to me. And so I'm telling the counselor this, and he says, what started this? I mean, how did you get this thing to want to be with you? And I said, I have no idea. And so I went and asked my mom what was going on and what she thought. Her grandma was actually a witch. Mm-hmm. And she said she believed that she brought him with her from Chicago. And he lived in my room. And so I told the counselor that, and he says, the only way you're going to get rid of him is if your mom comes in and tells him to go. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So I told my mom, I said, can you please come in? I don't know if we're going to pray. I don't know what's going to go on, but you need to tell this thing that it needs to go. Mm-hmm. And she did. Mm-hmm. She's like, I command you to leave. Leave my daughter alone. Mm-hmm. She even said, in Jesus' name.
In Jesus' name, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the counselor was in on it and everything. And she said that when she got home, there was such a peace in her house. And she hasn't had issues since. Mm-hmm. And I haven't had an issue since. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, I'd have a bad dream, mm-hmm. and I would be able to wake up. But, yeah, it was a scary time.
But the spiritual reality, and then also, for your mom not being a real committed person to the Lord or anything, but in Jesus' name, commanding, that had to be
that was weird.
Like a pivotal, one of those experiences that you're like, wow, this is really, it's supernatural. And I think that a lot of people they want to make everything just psychological or just emotional, but there's a real spiritual world. The Bible says we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, and mm-hmm. And the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He just wants to wipe us out. So fast forward a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you're 23. You feel like, in some regards, in a limited way, you're kind of delivered from that.
Yes.
Set free from that.
However, I was with a guy who was very
you're living together? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. I feel really bad because I feel like I broke up his marriage. Mm-hmm. When we met, I was just getting out of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And he had told me, he's like, well, I'm in the process of getting divorced and all this stuff. And I feel bad because I actually grew up with the girl that he was married to. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I destroyed their marriage because then... he hadn't started the process yet. Yeah. And so once they were divorced, I moved in with him because I couldn't afford my apartment anymore. And he was very verbally, emotionally abusive.
You got Taylor there. Obviously he didn't have any kids there.
He did not have any kids. And the things he would do to Taylor, just emotionally and verbally, was very hurtful. Mm-hmm. And I had told him, I says, I'm going to move out. It was about a year of going through all this. And because he was constantly, it wasn't our house, it was his house. And so he would just, it's so hard to explain. He would, he wouldn't allow Taylor in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. It's mine and Mom's room. You don't come in here. And so he would freak out if she put a foot in there. He wouldn't allow her to, we had a hot tub, he wouldn't allow her to go in there. Nope, sorry, it's only for adults. Just little things like that. And finally we just got to fighting so much. I says, I've got to move out. And he's like, you won't move out, you have it too good here. I was like, yeah. okay, whatever. So one day I just packed up my stuff and left. And of course I left my furniture there because all the furniture in there was mine. And he says, well, I'm just going to keep it for payment for living here. I was like, whatever. So anyway, I was still felt like I was in love with him. And so it was about 6 months of trying to get him back and and fighting with him and doing things just to, sexually to get him to try to come back to me. I would do anything he wanted. And I finally had a breakdown. And I lost my mind, and I was going to take Taylor, and I was going to go drive my car off somewhere. I was going to kill us both. And I went to my brother's house, and I got in there, and I said, I just want to say goodbye because I'm gone. And he's just like, what? What's going on? And I says, Taylor and I are gone for good. And I started to run to the car, and his friend called my parents. And Robbie wrestled me to the ground and held me down until my parents got there. And I literally had just a mental breakdown. And I ended up moving in with my parents. And I, once again, back in my bedroom, rocking back and forth, trying to get things straight and blaming God. Why'd you let this happen? Why is my life like this? I hate you.
And so that takes you close to the time that you're going to meet Dave?
Yep.
Okay. And so how old are you when you two meet? He's 29. He moves
I was 20.
You were
27
when I first moved here.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
26, 27 when I moved out here.
So it's 24, almost 24.
So you're going to run from the woods of New York, self-destructive lifestyle, and the only semblance of kind of normality was with your...
Yeah, when I came out here for a month.
Yeah, your aunt and uncle. So all these years later...
Yeah, I remember it being a safe place, and I just...
Did you get a job, or you just up and went?
Well, I
You
was
just moved?
contract developer out of my house.
Right.
So I could be wherever I wanted to. So who in the world chooses Idaho Falls when they can move anywhere they want?
I don't know. I really don't know.
So-
Miami,
I could have lived anywhere I wanted, and I chose Idaho Falls.
Yeah.
But it was because it was a safe place for me.
It was a safe place.
And it was the only place I had normalcy and stability. Even though it freaked me out, I remembered it very fondly.
Now, had you every 3 years there was a visit from your aunt and uncle, so you maintained relationship over all those years?
Yeah, we were and weren't close. I mean, there was always a real close bond because of how close my uncle and my mom are, so there was always a tightness there, but it wasn't like we knew each other great because we just weren't around each other a lot. I did start to, because I was doing quite a bit better financially. My mom was obviously in a very tough spot financially, so I started to fly her out here every year to see her brother. I came out here, I saw Yellowstone, fell in love with it. So there was other things that sort of promoted me coming out here, and I just...
Did your lifestyle change at all, though?
I knew when I came out here I had to break away, and I can remember when Jamie and I first met, I was trying to clean up. I did go cold turkey on the drinking and the booze for, I don't know, maybe 180 days. And I can remember even like when I first met here, even before I moved out, because I came out here to look for an apartment, and that's actually when we met. And then I drove my car across country just so I could see her. And then I eventually moved out like the following month, and we lived together pretty much from day one. And of course here I was like, I'm not going to have a girlfriend. I need some time to get my head straight.
From day one, you're with Jamie.
That's what I was saying too.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, she's coming off of this. She was definitely damaged because of the times, and I was screwed up because I was all full of chemicals and trying to come off of that. And
you guys were quite a party between the two of you.
Yeah, I mean,
very exciting kind of emotional train wreck.
And it's it's sort of funny because her talking about that relationship with the guy prior, it's just not something that's in our life anymore. But I can remember back to the baggage she was carrying that first year or so we were together, and it really was messing with her head. It really had messed her up.
And Taylor's in the mix of that.
Well, that was a weird thing.
To you,
well,
right?
I was always the youngest, so I wasn't necessarily one that I was ever used to taking care of kids, but I had dated a lot of girls with children. I had been with, gals and had their little kids calling me dad because I'd raised them for a year, and then, but I was a little bit hesitant about that because there was one little girl in particular I'd gotten really close to, a little girl that I raised for a year, and then I had to walk away from that relationship, and it just broke my heart because, man, I love that little girl.
Yeah.
So I was really afraid of that with Taylor. So I think in a way I sort of held back a little bit with Taylor at first probably. And like I said, I was just trying to get my own head straight. I was trying to clean up. the good thing was I was out of the lifestyle, the hardcore, and Jamie just wasn't a partier, no matter how much I tried to get her to party, she just wasn't.
Yeah.
Which, thank God, what a blessing.
Yeah.
What a blessing. I can remember back, I was like, hey, she's lame.
She's no fun at all.
But like, oh man, what a blessing in the long run, man.
Yeah.
Because man, I don't need that influence in my life because I'm just naturally that
So
way.
how long are you living together? And all of a sudden, I enter the scene when I'm gonna marry you guys, but you're coming to the church.
Well,
and I don't even know how that.
It was.
I don't remember how all that happened.
It was interesting because
Let's hear how the pieces came together.
when we had lived on Woodruff, we had talked a little bit about trying to find a church. He didn't want to do LDS. I didn't want to do Catholic, so we wanted to do something.
Well, let me
neutral.
back that up a little bit. My mom had gotten saved when I was about 15.
Okay.
And it was really gradual for her. I mean, she was still totally living in sin, relationship-wise. She was allowing me to do things where I was growing pot plants in the house. I was living with my girlfriends. It was not that she liked those things or condoned those things, but she just, so it wasn't like all of a sudden it was like a radical transformation for her. I went away to college, and she had gotten remarried, and that relationship was falling apart. And I knew my mom better than anybody. I'd been with her through her lowest lows, and nobody knew my mom like I knew my mom. And I knew how that woman responded to things. I knew how she responded to struggles. And I saw her as broken as anybody ever saw her. And she was going through her second divorce with her husband while I was at college, and shortly thereafter. And the relationship just wasn't good. And the weird thing was I saw this peace in her, and I'm just like, I knew how she responded to things. I knew every reaction she would do. I could press every trigger on her. I knew how she ticked. And it was weird because I was like, something's different about mom. She's still feeling the emotional pain. She's still upset. She's still wearing the burdens of the situation, but she was okay. And that was never there. She was just crushed before, but she was okay. And there was this piece that just, and through all my years of trying to fill that hole, and that's really what it was for me with all that stuff I was doing, whether it was filling it with a sports car, or being a muscle guy, or this great paying job, or being successful, or this relationship, or the drugs and alcohol to suppress the feelings. There was always this empty pit inside me. I never had peace. And it just got worse and worse. And I saw that peace in her, and that was always infectious for me. When I moved out here, she sent me out with a life application Bible, and she's like, "Don't throw it away." And I still have to this day her little inscription from mom. She's like, "Just keep it." She's like, "There may come a day." And she actually caught me. There was a few times where I would be running from a girlfriend or something, or escaping town. I would drive down drunk in the middle of the night to her house, and she'd wake up in the morning, 6 in the morning. I'd be down there, and I would crack open the Bible. And I didn't have much Bible knowledge. I didn't really know much, but there was something started to pull me there, and that last year of being in New York. And so she sent me with that life application Bible, and I kept it for years. And so, especially since Jamie and I were basically starting a family, and we'd matured to the point where we were living in sin, obviously, but I'd raised Taylor as my own daughter for a couple of years, and it was I felt like this is probably going to be something that's going to go on. We're probably eventually get married, and and the Lord was definitely tugging on my heartstrings. So that plays into where we'd started talking about church. But I just didn't know, I'd been exposed to all sorts of religion in college. I had Jewish fraternity brothers and Muslim fraternity brothers, and everyone's Catholic from New York, and a bunch. So there was all sorts of stuff that I was exposed to, and
kind of a smorgasbord of religious. So you start looking, you start praying. I guess
we weren't praying. I didn't pray.
Yeah.
So how's that work?
So then I was driving down 12th Street, and I saw that First Christian Church.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned it to him. I'm like, hey, there's like a First Christian Church, we should go check that out. And he's like, well, he had a hard time actually believing in God because he has a hard time, if you can't see it, it isn't
too
real.
Logical. Yeah. I'm a mathematician, a logician by trade.
And so it was hard to convince him.
Yeah, faith.
So did you go to that one?
No, actually, we just sort of dropped it.
Okay.
And then my sister worked for Dr. Anderson, and you went in there one day. And she started talking to you about it. And it was funny because she thought it was a Presbyterian church.
Our church was a Presbyterian. Oh, okay.
She's like, I think he's a pastor of this Presbyterian church or something. And it seems really nice. She's like, we should go check it out. So God was sort of tugging on her heart too. And so then I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, then she called me one day. She's like, I set up a meeting to meet with Rick. on Thursday or some weird thing. And she's like, would you come with me? And I'm like, really? I'm like, I have nothing to say. She's like,
An appointment with
yeah. She's like, just come with. And I'm like, okay. So we came and we talked to you for about an hour. And
that was here in this building?
Yes.
Or was it Broadway?
Yep.
Okay.
It was in your office.
Yeah.
And it was 2003. 2004.
Early 2004,
Okay.
like January, February.
Yeah. And so you told us, you said, well, we have a Saturday night service if you don't feel like, if you don't like Sundays, it's at 7, and we have a Wednesday night. And so Kim's like, we should go check it out. I'm like, okay, I'll go with you. And so we came that Saturday night, and the music was amazing, and the sermon was really good. And I got home, and I was just ecstatic. I was talking to Dave about it, and I said,
I told her she had to go check it out first because I wasn't going to go first. I'm like, well, you can check it out. If you like it, then maybe I'll go. And she was all pumped up.
It's really cool. They have a live band. And so then Kim went with me another time. We went like 2 or 3 times, and then finally I was able to get Dave to go with. And at that point, Kim stopped going. And I says, why won't you come to church? And she says, because I'm not ready to change. Because she's living in sin. And I was like, okay. I said, it's not that hard, I said, you just got to do what's right. And so that sort of broke my heart.
Well, I think part of that is sort of the indoctrination of the culture of the area. I think there's some overtones in this area that you have to be a certain way to go into the church, and I think the LDS beliefs of the community, I mean, I can see that in your sister, where she, like you said, she definitely was, her heartstrings being tugged. I can remember picking up the kids to bring them to church, and I was getting my nephew from her house, and she was very supportive of me bringing him here, but she just knew that she was living in a relationship where they weren't married and stuff like that, and she didn't want that to change, or wasn't ready to change that, or necessarily get married or whatever. But I'm like, you don't have to. You just go and hear, and those things will, the sanctification process will happen little by little. It just does. If you give yourself over to the things of the Lord, you don't have to be perfect to walk in the door. That's the point, Kim. It doesn't matter. Right. You don't have to be. So, but she just wasn't comfortable and things like that.
Well, if that was the case, you two would, and they wouldn't let me in the door, or you couldn't do what?
That's why I said, like, look at me, Kim. I was just getting high with,
she knew what your lifestyle was
and I was
like.
still getting high. I was still drinking. I was,
So how long did you come before you felt like you came, and what was your first impression? She was excited.
I had been exposed to born again Christian churches a little bit back home, because like my mom would always try and get me to go, and I was like, no. The only saving grace was there was a bar right across the street from the church, so I could get out of there quick. But like I remember one Christmas, she's like, that's all I want for Christmas. I don't want a gift. You go to church with me. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go. And I went in there, and everyone was doing like Hi Hitler, and I'm like, why are these people raising their hands to Hitler? What is going on here? It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. And it wasn't like people were getting slain in the spirit or anything, but it was.
It's outside of your comfort zone.
Oh, yeah, and praise Jesus. And I'm just like, at that point in my life, if someone had come into the bar and talked to me about Jesus, I would have punched him square in the face.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no tolerance for that stuff. You weren't going to tell me I needed something. I was too strong for that. I took care of myself. I raised myself. I was an independent person. Everything I had, I got for myself. And no one was going to tell me I was weak and needy, So I was really freaked out when I went to my mom's church, and they're a little bit more charismatic back there than we are here. I think this community is sort of a little bit more conservative in general, but so it definitely it was a pretty eye-opening experience. So when I came here, it wasn't that bad for me because I'd been exposed to it once or twice. So I wasn't surprised if the music, and I was a metalhead, so it wasn't like I was coming from an LDS faith of hymnals and things like that, So I was actually like, well, the music's actually sort of mellow. Let's like crank it up and do some double kick drums or something, But I came, and the music was okay, but for me it was the message. I can remember we came 3 weeks. It was in March of 2004, and we the first time I went, I was like, well, we're just going. It wasn't. I don't think we ever had a conversation about do we go back or do we not. It was just like once we went once, we just were going. I mean, it was. I don't think we had a verbal discussion to agree to it. It was like we just knew we were going to go. And I went about 3 weeks, and I can remember each of the first 3 weeks, I was really lifted up. It was encouraging to me, and really enjoyed the message. The music, like I said, was a little bit of adjustment for me because I was a little bit more hardcore, so it was actually sort of mellow, for me. But then the third or fourth time, I can't remember which one it was, and it was right at the end of March, beginning of April. I don't know what the message was, I can't remember, but man, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And just, it wasn't guilt, but it was the conviction that came over me, because it's like, man, I'm raising Taylor, and every time she goes to the fridge, the beer drawer is right in her face. And I'm telling her not to do drugs. I'm going downstairs and getting high every night. I'm watching pornography, and here I'm living with Jamie, sexually immorality, and I'm, and I was so far gone that it was like, still mentally living the way the world lives, that it was like, how do you even do this, But the weird thing is that, I'd felt guilt my whole life, and maybe that's what the message I might even been about that night is that, conviction versus condemnation, and I never contemplated the fact that you could actually live life without guilt. I thought that guilt was something that everyone was supposed to carry, and I had all sorts of guilt, all sorts of stuff I'd done.
A truckload.
Oh yeah, and it was weighing me down, and just, you once again, like I said, I would be using drugs in the house, and I would enjoy the high, but then I would feel guilty because I'm like, here, Taylor is a room over, and I'm hiding and I'm sneaking and I'm, doing this stuff, and I'm lying to her face, How can you tell if you know what's wrong for your kid, how is it right for you? I just feel like a hypocrite, So I can just remember pulling out of this parking lot and just like, Jamie was driving, I just slumped down to the seat, and I just felt like, I just got smoked. It's like, man, I'm just crushed. And this conviction just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it was at that moment, I came back the next week, and that's when I did, I remember praying the sinner's prayer at the end of service, and I was just sold out at that point. For me, it was a radical transformation. That was beginning of April 2004. Last time I got high was May 20th, 2004. Last time I drank was August of 2004. And, like I said, I've been drink size too. My family name is synonymous with drinking back where I'm from. I could never even, I could always envision myself, when you're a kid and you think, well, I don't want to be some 50, 60-year-old guy smoking dope or whatever, but you always envision yourself drinking, because everyone drank till the day they died where I grew up. I just could never imagine myself without that in my life, and then the Lord just took it. It was just gone, I haven't had a drop since, and I thank God my wife is the one who doesn't drink, because, to each their own, some people will have a glass of wine or a beer, and that's fine for them, but I'm a zero tolerance. I have to be, because I'm the kind of person that if I open that door, it'll be a six-pack, it'll be a case, it'll be, so I just, there's no need, and it doesn't stumble me if, Jamie were to have a margarita, or if, I was someone had a glass of wine. It doesn't bother me anymore. It doesn't affect me in that way, but for me personally, I'm not supposed to say never, but I can't open that door. But the good thing is the Lord just took the desire away, just gone.
Describe, the peace of the Lord that came into your life when that.
For me, it was sort of weird. I think a lot of people, maybe it's because they have more scriptural background. I just didn't have much Bible knowledge. The whole salvation message wasn't really something that was very impactful to me at first, which is sort of weird. I think most people, it's like, oh, where am I going to go for eternity and heaven and hell and God? And that wasn't it for me at all. For me, it was, I just was so rotten on the inside. The hole was so big on the inside. I mean, anger and just, you learn all these bad coping skills, and you got all this baggage, and we both had a ton of baggage. And for me, like I said, finding out I don't have to carry guilt, and just by making things right, and it's like people are like, oh, there's all these rules of Christianity. How can you stand living like that? And I'm like, it's not even rules, man. I mean, you're serving one way or the other. Either you're serving Satan or you're serving the Lord, man. Because you're sold out to Mary. I don't care who you are. And I was sold out. I was sold out to Satan. I was sold out to the devil. And when like I said, the Lord just took away the desire to do those things. He just cleaned me up on his own. I mean, it wasn't me. And little by little, those things were cleaned up, man. It really just freed me up. The fact that I just, I could have a clean conscience. I could feel good what I was teaching my daughter. I had already proposed to Jamie at that point, right before that anyways. But we were going through premarital counseling with Gordon, and we took a vow of celibacy. And here we had lived together in that way for years. And
we had met with you. We're like, you need to move out. And we're both like, there's no way I can move out.
I'm like, we live together. We're raising her daughter.
We just bought a house.
I can remember going through the house and dumping out all the liquor, which was sacrilege to me.
It's a big deal.
I'm dumping out bottles of vodka and sambuca and tequila, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And throwing the porn collection away, and just doing all that stuff, and just feeling great about just not having the burden of those things, and even even though we lived sexually immoral and we both had relationships prior, I can definitely say by taking that vow of celibacy for several months prior to definitely made for a much more special wedding night, and just sort of the whole thing. It added something to that whole, just getting married experience to me. It was really special.
So Dave surrenders to the Lord like 4 Sundays in or so. And did you respond in the same way? Or, did you pray, or do you remember?
I think I might have taken a little longer.
Yeah.
I've always known about God, and
Right.
I would never, except for the time I prayed for a child, but I would never pray and ask for stuff unless it was, please keep my dad safe, or please keep my brother safe, or whatever. But it was always a blame game. Why God? Why God? But after you had asked us to do this, I started going back and really thinking about when I came and to the Lord and stuff. And it's interesting because when you guys were on Broadway, I used to think you were a wedding place because it was chapel.
Sure, yeah. Chapel.
But
we're known as the McDonald's church back then. This is the church right by McDonald's.
But what was interesting is when I think back, every time I would drive down Broadway, because my parents live out by Reed's Dairy, I was always drawn to look, always. And so I think that one might have been God sort of nudging me. And but it took me probably...
I can remember, because for me it was pretty radical. I can remember you asking, I don't even know if I'm saved.
I've done the sinner's prayer, and I've...
but it wasn't...
Over and over, every weekend. I was always doing it.
Yeah.
And I think when it finally hit me, I had gone into work. I work at Fairman's, and there was a lady there with her mom, and she asked me, she's like, what church do you go to? Because I'm here for a while, and I'd like to maybe go to a church. And I said, well, I go to Calvary Chapel. And she's like, I knew there's something special about you because there's just a glow about you. And she's like, you're so happy and at peace. And so that's when it really hit me. I'm like, he's here. He's in my heart. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was interesting. And it's funny because my sister and I, we've always been sort of competitive. She was very angry when I got pregnant. She was supposed to have the first child. And so we didn't get along at that time. But a few weeks ago, she says, I want to tell you something. I don't want you to be mad. I'm like, okay. And so she says, Zach got on the honor roll. That's her son. And I was like, he did? She's like, yeah, he got a 4.0. I'm like, that is so awesome. That's so cool. And she was quiet. And I was like, what's the matter? She's like, you're not mad? I said, why would I be mad? I said, I don't get mad on those things anymore. Yeah. I'm not competitive anymore. And so I think that really took her back, She was shocked.
Expecting a different reaction.
And my brother the same way. He's like, can I tell you something without getting angry? Because that's how I was. I would jump in their face whenever they tried to correct me, criticize anything. And now I'm just like, oh, let me hear it. So it's really cool.
So now these years, it's been 8 years. You guys walking with the Lord, serving the Lord.
Yeah.
What's life like in Jesus?
It's pretty amazing. I mean, to be honest, and I think you probably experienced the same thing. It's like just 2 different lives.
Yeah.
It's the people out here don't really know me the way I used to be, so it's hard for a lot of people to imagine that I was the way I was. And there's a bazillion stories, and I don't tell most of them because it's like scary to people. But it's even hard for me to this point to really put myself back in that situation where I was the way I was, and to envision living like that again. And I feel blessed that I've had a chance to walk both sides. I'm glad that my kids will always, Taylor, obviously, she accepted the Lord. We all got baptized in the Snake River in 2004 in the summer, all together, all 3 of us.
After our wedding.
Yeah.
And, but we had 2 other children after we got married, and they've always grown up in the church. I mean, it's sort of funny. We're watching Left Behind series with my 6-year-old. We're sitting down having prophecy discussions about Revelation, and it's like
with a 6-year-old.
It's just like she's sort of a brainiac. I mean, she's sort of a heady one, so she's always thinking and analyzing things. But it's just crazy. But not having to wake up hungover every day is just such a blessing. Being able to eat,
being able to wake up and say you have something to live for, to be a light for God, instead of waking up saying, I can't do this another day. And
in the trials, I mean, we've had a little bit of a stretch the last few months. We've had some my dad's got cancer, and we've had some other things that have happened, and that sort of stirs up some of the family wounds that we've got, a pretty, separated family still. And just some other things have been going on. There's life has ups and downs, right?
It does.
We all go through periods where it's like you sort of feel like you're sailing, and you go through periods where it feels like every time you turn around, you're sort of getting kicked down. And even just the experience of when someone passes away, someone that knows the Lord, just how, like I said, when I was sort of at the tail end of my spiral, is those 6 people dying in those 6 months. I just didn't know how to comprehend and process that, And now I think about when people pass away. Now that I know the Lord, it's it's just such a different. It's like I know why I reacted the way I did before when people pass, and why I just self-induced, and why everyone there was drinking their themselves away. Because how else do you process that? It was so final. It was so. And just being able to have a different, a view on how to deal with those things. We went through some financial ups and downs. I was out of work, and my wife's pregnant. I'm going to have to probably be in Seattle for work, and they won't let me come home. And we didn't know where we were going to be. We were pretty much destitute. I was around doing credit card sales, and I was just scrambling for work, trying to make a living. And the Lord really broke. I'm a bit of a control freak, so the Lord really broke me down in that area. And I thought I was broken, and then He broke me some more. And I thought I was broken, and He broke me some more. And and things got to an absolute head. We'd only been saved for a couple of years, and that last month was actually the worst. Where things were, we were living on credit, just trying to stay in our house, and we basically gave up everything but our house. Yeah. And totally recovered from all that, and all's been good. But through that process, He broke down my need to try and control the situation. I was very prideful about providing, which I think that's a good thing. To have pride about that as a man. Is to be a provider for your family and take pride in that. But I was overly, I was too much of a, too independent in that area from the Lord, and not relying on Him to be my provider. And just now it's like. Well, and I have a good job, and I do well in my work, and I'm blessed there, and I've grown to a position of authority. There's a lot of Christians where I work now, and it's a blessing of an environment. And even the people that aren't Christian, we have great dialogue. We're able to share open and honestly about Jesus, and have great conversations about that. And but the peace. For me, that I think that's the biggest thing. Of course, as I've grown in my walk and understood the Word more, and and the other thing is, like she said, faith is hard for me because I'm not naturally one to believe in things that I can't see, right? And you got to take that leap of faith, and the work that the Lord just did to me, I didn't even have a choice. It was a done deal. He had me. But I'm a digger. I'm a kind of person that if there's something that doesn't line up, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to flesh it out. I find the holes in things for a living. That's what I do. I break things. I find where things are flawed. And the great thing about the Word is the more I understand the Word, the more it confirms itself. And it's just one of those things where I look at our faith and I ask questions about those, and I keep finding holes in those things, and things don't line up. But just studying the Word confirms the Word over and over. The more you understand it, the more that it just locks itself in. And so the peace for me is it's awesome. You don't have to live life like that. It's just, who knew?
Who knew? That's what I thought.
It's crazy. It's just, it's just such a different mindset. And it's like, and I wish I could, and part of you just wants to share that with everybody, It's I still see a lot of my friends. A lot of my friends have passed away back home. They've wrecked in motorcycles, committed suicide, whatever. They're in prison or whatever. A lot of them have actually. There's been several that have come to the Lord. But it's like, maybe this is a bad analogy, but it's like I can remember, when I was in the drug lifestyle, it's like if you had the stuff that was like the great stuff, you had to share it with your friends. Like, you got to check this out. This is the best thing ever, man. And that's what faith is for me now. It's like, you have to check this out,
It's the best thing ever.
It's the best thing ever. I need to share this with you, know, but I have a huge burden for people in that, that came from where I came from. Just like, Jamie with young teen pregnant girls and sort of, the emotional roller coaster that they go through. It's like, your circumstances and the trials you go through definitely shape you for, potential ministry opportunities and people you really care a burden for when you've walked a mile in their shoes. And just in summary, the one thing I can say, though, is that I've lived life without the Lord, and I've lived life with the Lord. And there's no doubt which place I'd rather be. No doubt.
Amen. You got to taste and see that the Lord is good. And I think that the whole world looks at us and we're kind of an enigma or a mystery. They want the peace, but they don't know it comes in relationship with Jesus. Not a bunch of religion, not a bunch of garbage.
Rules,
they just,
and policies and works.
And we're in love with someone who has changed our lives in Jesus. And that's what grace does, because we didn't earn it. We don't deserve it. God just poured it out on us and said, here you go. I love you guys. And that's why my son came. So thank you guys for sharing how Jesus has touched you by his grace. It's a blessing.